few weeks ago, Nike signed the #1 female pickleball player in the world. Days later, Rolex signed the #1 padel player on the planet. Padel, pickleball, sports that didn't even exist in mainstream culture 5 years ago. And I'm sitting here knowing that hundreds of thousands or millions of people around the world practice martial arts every single day. Karate, boxing, BJJ, judo, MMA, you name it. And the biggest brands on earth, they don't care. I've spent 20 years inside the industry as a fighter, as a promoter, as someone who co-built fight brands, and finally, I think I figured out exactly why this is happening. And honestly, it pisses me off, but more importantly, I think I know how to fix it. Let me paint you a picture. It's 2025. A 19-year-old girl who plays pickleball gets a Nike deal. A padel player, padel, a sport most people can't even explain, gets signed by Rolex. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor, one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet, his biggest brand deal is a whiskey company he owns himself. Canelo Alvarez, the highest paid boxer in the world, has Hennessy and some crypto, and some major brands, but these are mostly one-off deals. Think about that. The most watched combat sports athletes in the world can get the deals that mid-tier tennis players and first-year paddle pros are pulling in. And you might be asking, why is that? And I've been obsessed with this question, and after spending 2 decades building fight promotions, competing internationally, and negotiating with brands and broadcasters across the world, I think I finally have the full answer. And it's not just one thing, it's a system. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Before I get into it, I want to say something. This isn't just a rant. This is actually a roadmap. If you're a fighter, a promoter, a coach, or even just someone who loves this sport and wants to see it grow, stick with me. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand the exact levers that need to move. Let's get into it. Here's the first reason, and it's one nobody in our industry wants to say out loud. Combat sports have always been the sport of people with no money. Think about what you need to get started. A pair of gloves, maybe $40, a gi, $60, a mouth guard, and that's it. You're already in training. Now, compare that to a sport like hockey. You're spending thousands of dollars before you even touch the ice. Golf, $300 for entry-level clubs. Tennis, $200 racket plus court fees plus lessons. Surfing, same story. And here's the thing, big brands don't just want participants, they want customers. Repeat customers who buy expensive stuff over and over again. Our gear is cheap and it lasts forever. Maybe it gets stinky, but it lasts forever. And that's great for the 16-year-old kid grinding at a boxing gym in a rough neighborhood. That kid is exactly who our sport was built for. And I mean that with total respect. But for Nike, for Rolex, the math just doesn't work the same way. When I was competing in karate internationally, I had an Adidas deal, a sponsorship deal. Sounds impressive, right? But actually, it wasn't the big brand of Adidas. It was, but it was a small company in France that had a licensing deal to use the name, specifically for karate and judo uniforms. They could use the logo, but they had zero connection to the real Adidas machine when it comes to the money. No global marketing, no big budget, nothing. And that's the level we were operating at, even at the top of the sport. Now here's the second reason, and this one is brutal. There are too many combat sports and nobody outside our world can tell them apart. Karate, kickboxing, boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, Taekwondo, Kung Fu, wrestling, judo, sambo. I could keep going. Even I get confused sometimes, and I've been in this world my entire life. Now imagine you're the chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500 company. You've got a sponsorship budget. You want to get into the sport. Where do you start? You have no idea where to start. But for pickleball, it's easy. One governing body, simple rules. You can learn it in an afternoon, and that CMO probably plays pickleball. He's arguing with his friends about whether the ball was in or out and his Sunday morning game. He gets it emotionally. He lives it. But for combat sports, he's never stepped on a mat. He doesn't know the difference between a jab and a cross. He doesn't know why BJJ is different from judo. He thinks that these are just people in pajamas. He's not going to spend 6 months learning our ecosystem just to justify a sponsorship budget. We make it too hard to say yes. There is a massive disconnect in combat sports that I don't think we talk about enough. Hundreds of thousands of kids do karate. Almost nobody watches karate on TV. Millions of people wrestle. Almost nobody watches wrestling outside of the Olympics. It's like running. Tens of millions of people run every day. Almost nobody watches marathons on television. But here's what running figured out that we never did. It jumped from participation to lifestyle. Nike didn't just become a $1 trillion company by selling to runners. They became a $1 trillion company by making every single person on the planet feel like they were an athlete. Just Do It wasn't for elite marathoners. It was for everyone. Combat sports never made that jump. We stayed in the gym, we stayed in the octagon, we stayed in the cage, in the ring, and on the mats, and we never really became a lifestyle. Some BJJ brands made the push, but that wasn't enough. And the UFC? Even the UFC, which is a marketing masterpiece in a lot of ways, even they have this problem. If you look around in the octagon, the UFC proved that people will watch MMA if you package it right. They've done something extraordinary. But look at who's sponsoring UFC events. Monster Energy, Bud Light, Modelo, crypto companies. Notice what's missing? Gear brands, equipment companies, the actual products that fighters use every single day. And you know why? Because the fans at UFC events are not the ones training. They are spectators. They are drinking beer and energy drinks and watching the action. They are not going home to hit a heavy bag. The brands that show up are the brands that sell to spectators and not practitioners. Venom getting into the UFC, that's the exception to the rule. And it was a massive deal precisely because it was so rare. One gear brand breaking through the noise after 30 years. That's the paradox. The UFC built the biggest combat sports audience in history, but it's an audience of watchers and not doers. And big brands want customers, not just eyeballs. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part I don't think anyone else is talking about. Let me tell you something about how brand deals actually work. Brands follow rich people. Simple as that. Think about Formula One. Rolex sponsors Formula One because the people in the paddock, in the VIP suites, watching at home, they have money. They buy Rolexes. Golf, tennis, same thing. Think about combat sports. Boxing gyms in tough neighborhoods, MMA gyms in strip malls, wrestling rooms in underfunded high schools. It's not the same. This has always been the sport for people who are grinding their way up. That is honestly one of the most beautiful things about martial arts. It doesn't care where you come from, but brands do care where you come from. More specifically, brands care where your audience comes from. Because if your fans aren't dropping 30,000 on a Rolex, Rolex isn't going to show up at your event. It sounds cold. It is cold, but it's real. I've sat in rooms trying to convince brands to come into combat sports. Oh, so many people watch us, we got viral. And I've watched their eyes glaze over when the conversation turns to audience demographics. It's not malicious. They're just doing the math. And the math right now doesn't favor us the way it favors tennis or golf. Here's something else that rarely gets discussed. A top tennis player competes in 20 or more tournaments a year. A golfer on tour every single week. There's a new event with their name on it. A combat sports athlete, 3 fights a year if they're lucky. 1 if they get injured. Brands want consistency. They want to see their logo over and over and over again. They want a schedule they can plan around. Our sport doesn't offer that. There's no season, no predictable rhythm, no calendar that a brand can build a campaign around. And most fighters don't have the professional management infrastructure that tennis players or golfers have. The agents, the PR teams, the brand consultants who know how to package an athlete for a Fortune 500 company. That ecosystem is just starting to develop in combat sports. And meanwhile, the number 1 padel player in the world has a team around him that made it that simple for Rolex to come in and say yes. We need to build that infrastructure and fast. One more thing that nobody wants to say out loud in a pitch meeting. Some brands flat out will not associate with fighting because of how it looks. You and I both know that most disciplines respectful, mentally tough people I've ever met came out of martial arts. The stereotypes of the violent fighter is almost always completely backwards. But perception is reality in the boardroom. A CMO at a family consumer brand doesn't want to explain to his CEO why their logo was next to a bloody face on a pay-per-view broadcast. It doesn't matter how wrong that perception is, it's the conversation they don't want to have. And until we change that narrative at a cultural level, the same way the UFC changed the narrative around MMA being human cockfighting, some of the biggest brands will stay on the sideline. Okay, so I've just laid out 6 reasons why combat sports is getting left behind, and I want to be honest, it's a lot of structural stuff. It's not easy to fix overnight. But here's what I also believe. We are at the beginning of the window. Social media has changed the game. Fighters with 500,000 Instagram followers are getting brand deals right now that didn't exist 5 years ago. Not because of their record, but because of their reach. The influencer athlete model is cracking this open. And the promotions that understand this, that build fighters as characters, as personalities, as brands, those are the ones that are going to attract the real money. When I built Karate Combat, we made the brand bigger than any individual fighter. When we launched Dirty Boxing, we put Mike Perry as the face and as a co-owner from day one because authentic personalities create gravity. That's the new model. And here's what I know from being inside this industry for 2 decades. The gap exists because both sides don't understand each other. Big brands don't know how to enter combat sports without getting burned. Promotions don't know what brands actually need to say yes. That's the problem I've spent the last decade trying to solve, and it's exactly why I built Skovox Entertainment, to sit in between those 2 worlds and translate. Because millions of people train martial arts every single day. They're disciplined, they're dedicated, they represent something real. They deserve better than being the afterthought of the sponsorship world. And the brands that figure out how to tap into this community first, they're going to have a massive advantage. Every week in my newsletter, I break down exactly what's happening in the fight business, the deals, the mistakes, the models that are actually working and the ones that are quietly failing. If you want to understand this industry at a deeper level, whether you're a fighter trying to build your brand, a promoter trying to attract sponsors, or just someone who loves this sport and wants to see it grow, I'll leave the link in the description. It's free and it's real. And if this video made you think differently about why your sport is being left behind, hit and smash the like button, because I'm going to keep pulling back the curtain on how this business actually works. See you in the next one.